apart from having a hashtag that every time I see it on Twitter, I think it's a commercial for a car, which I've got to get that point out there before the season even begins, because it's going to be a tired joke soon. That hashtag Fiat Lux is going to be everywhere, and I think it means a city of light or something like that in Latin, but all I associate it with is Fiat, the brand of cars. So I can't help but think of the car every time. I mean, I don't even think there is a Fiat Lux, but whatever. Think of the Fiat Punto or whatever. Okay, so Paris Eternal. Apart from having that hashtag, Paris are the only team in the league that have gone for a full European look, really have doubled down on representing Europe in the Overwatch League. The only other team that's there in Europe is the London Spitfire, and something tells me those players weren't born in Europe. But Paris have really gone hardcore on that aspect. And the question, I suppose, is, will that pay off? There certainly are European super teams that you would have been able to make for 2018, potentially 2019, although it becomes a lot more difficult, and maybe in the future as well. So let's start off at the beginning. Where do I think they'll be in terms of where I've put them in the power ranking? I've ranked them at 17th overall, but I think their effective range is somewhere from about 18th. I don't think they'll be at the very bottom. I think they're too good for that. But I think their peak is probably somewhere around the mid-table in 12th. I don't see a very high ceiling on this team, and it's part of the reason that I've rated them towards the low end of that 18th to 12th range. And so let's go into some of the reasons why. Actually, no. Do you know what? To start out with, I'll go into some of the reasons why there's reasons to be optimistic about this team. The coaching staff. This is what everybody talks about when they're discussing the Paris Eternal, which is refreshing, actually, because I think it was something that wasn't discussed enough in 2018, and something that's, talked about all over the place. If you talk about the NFL, I mean, the Super Bowl just happened. All anyone's talking about is the coaching staff and how they work with the quarterback and stuff like that. So I think it's really interesting as a topic to discuss, and I think it does have a massive impact on how these teams work. So, head coach, Demon, who used to work for the LA Valiant, very smart young guy. I think he's only something like 22, something like that. Used to be a strategic coach for the LA Valiant, so now he's moving into more of a overall position. I think he's going to be fairly, I don't even know the adjective for this, but he's gonna delegate, I think. More so than take all the strategy on himself. So some head coaches, which by the sound of it is like DPay for the LA Gladiators, for example, like to do a lot of the strategy themselves and really like have a good handle on what their team's going to be playing in all of those games, really decide what compositions and how they're going to be playing them. I think Demon used to do a lot of that for the LA Valiant, but I don't think that's something that he's going to be doing. He's going to take more of a hands-off approach and really make sure that the system and the team culture is set up effectively. Which is something that LA Valiant did very well. And so if Demon has learnt from that system and is able to apply his own stuff, I think he could very effectively set up a nice team culture and team atmosphere. So I think he will be effective in that approach. So who else have they got? Reddit's favorite coach, Kai, who I recently wrote an article about Paris, and I said respected by everybody apart from Reddit, because for some reason, the average fan really seemed to think that Kai was the problem with the Dallas Fuel. I think his hands were tied in some situations. He may not have been in the correct coaching role as like a head coach rather than a strategic or assistant coach. It was a very it was a very player-run team anyway, so limits to what you can actually do as a coach. I think he'll be better in the Paris Eternal system, and I think that he's a good coach anyway. Comes with a lot of experience, knows what he's doing in terms of strategy and how to make players better, I think. So I don't share the popular consensus that Kai was an issue or would be an issue for the Paris Eternal. I think he's a benefit and a good one at that. Then they have a player development coach. So player development coach or positional coach, they are normally the one that sits down with each player and goes over their VOD and tells them exactly how to improve in certain scenarios, rather than either defining what compositions to use and how to approach points, or the engagements, like how to take a team fight, where you should be positioned based on everybody else. This is more like the micro of what each player on the team should be doing. And that is apparently Feifei or Felix. So it's probably Fifi, isn't it? I don't know. Guy's got accents all over his name. I don't know how accents work. We don't have them in English. and he used to come from, or he came from Eagle Gaming. Eagle Gaming were probably the best GOATS team in the world, according to everybody that played against them, basically, in the World Cup kind of time. They've beaten all the World Cup teams as far as I can tell. The ones that were in the Paris stop, so they were beating France and beating the UK. And UK were very good, right? So that gives you some idea about how good they were. And then the team split up, so we couldn't see them really develop over the course of the next few months in this Contenders season. But the coach has been working with that composition for a long, long time, knows the ins and outs of it, knows how it works, and has had success in the past as well. So I think he's a great addition to the team. And then they have Sata, the guy that used to work with Finnish teams, particularly Giganti is the one that you'll probably know most of all, but also NIP in the past. Worked with guys like Fraggy, Zappis, Manitin, Zuppe, who else? Loads of guys. Big Goose, Shaz, Reaper, basically any Finn that you can think of that's in the league, and a bunch of others as well. And he is already proven that he can get good results. He in particular seems to work on tank lines and back lines and really make sure that they're working as well as they possibly can. A very good mind for the game, has just proven himself time and time again. So this is a very good coaching staff. Those four in particular, I think, are going to have a lot of success with the Paris Eternal in terms of what they can do, bringing this team from its base level and pushing it as far as it can go. You couldn't really ask for a better bunch of Western coaches. But the team that they're working with, the reason that I have them so low down the table is that I just think on paper, the actual ceiling or the raw talent of these guys is lower than a lot of other people in the league. And it's probably going to upset quite a few either European Contenders viewers or people that rate these guys in the past. But what you've got to understand is the competition in the Overwatch League in terms of the individual skill has increased massively compared to, if you're thinking some of these guys were at the top of the world in 2016, 2017. But times have changed, man. There's a lot of really good players out there, really good Korean players in particular, that have gotten better and better, and the ones that were really good have stayed at the top and continue to improve. The competition's fiercer than it's ever been. And so comparatively, these guys have dipped off. So who am I talking about? So on support, their support line is Cruz, who I think is actually really good. I think he's one of the better players on this team. Very good support player, has played DPS in the past, has a good mind for the game, is also a guy with a lot of leadership qualities, is able to call intelligently, but also like lead the team. Some people are just good at calling, right? They make the right decisions at the right time, and they have a good read for the game, and they can track ultimates and stuff. Cruz can do that stuff, but he's also got a leadership personality where if he tells the team to do something, they'll do it, they'll follow it. So I think that's really important from a main support. And then he can also actually play Lucio and Mercy very well. And we've seen that if you give him some other heroes, like sometimes he flexes off to like play an Ana or a Zen, or previously, I mean, he's played Genji in the past, right? So I think he's very flexible. I think he's a great pillar to build this team around. And then he's going to be supporting Heap or Grey. And I don't know who's going to be fielded here, honestly. The coaches have worked, I think, with Heap a little bit more than Grey in the past in previous teams. But arguably Grey's a better Zenyatta. I'm not really sure. And either way, really, even though these guys were good in Europe, I don't think that they're going to be outstanding in the Overwatch League. I think, in fact, that they're going to look a little underwhelming in the Overwatch League because there's so many goddamn great flex supports. In terms of Zenyatas, there are a ton of them. And main tanks as well, when we get onto them. There's so many good main tanks in Overwatch League 2019. So, even though they are good players, clearly good players, they're not going to stand out, I think. Because they're going up against just some absolute beasts. It's one of the roles in Overwatch that's increased in terms of skill cap and the average level of play massively over the last year, honestly. So yeah, it's solid. I don't think it's going to do wonders. I think Cruz is very good. I think Heap and Grey are going to be okay, but honestly towards the bottom end of the table in terms of where the rest of the competition is at. They're good, but they're just not good enough to be like any higher. Then their main tanks is a kind of similar position to their flex supports, in my opinion. They've got Cloudy and Ben Best. Now, LH Cloudy was a caller with Giganti. He used to call on tank alongside Massa, who's gone over to the Atlanta Reign. So it's nice for Cloudy and for Sita, who's come over as an assistant coach from Giganti, remember, that they still have that kind of calling structure maintained, because I think what's probably going to happen is Cruz and Cloudy are going to do the majority of the calling for this team, and then you have coaches that know how that communication structure works, and they know where everybody else needs to fill in, and those seem to be the best two roles for people to call from. There's some of the teams that do it differently, like the London Spitfire has Bedosian call from Zenyatta, but in general, you tend to see more vocal main tanks and main supports. Cloudy has a lot of potential. I think his Winston is good, and his Reinhardt has been, within the GOATS composition, has been very good. Probably not quite as good as Ben Best, but I reckon they're on a pretty similar level, honestly. But both of these main tanks have been playing Reinhardt for a long time, because tanks have basically dominated the European scene for, I don't know, the last year, honestly. Maybe even more than that. It's been a long time that Europe has been playing triple tank or quad tank. So when we get a Winston meta, which is inevitable, man, it's just inevitable. The hero's so good, and anytime you break tanks, the default goes back to like some kind of divey comp with a Winston. I think this team's going to struggle. And I think they need to do work very quickly to be able to get up to the level. And even if they max out the potential of guys like Cloudy and Ben Best on Winston, they are still not going to be at the level of some of these other main tanks in the league. So the longer it stays on Reinhardt-centric compositions, I think the better for Cloudy or Ben Best, honestly. But I do think that Cloudy in particular has potential to be like a good main tank for this team. I don't think he's going to stand out. I think he's probably going to be... This might be a little bit of an unfair comparison, but I think it's reasonable. A bit like a Fraggy. And people think of Fraggy as a poor main tank. I think that's like the general consensus. But that's a little unfair. When you see him in Stage 3, or even towards the end of Stage 2, and then the few times that they ran him in Stage 4, he was actually pretty good. He was teaming up with Snillo. They would run on Route 66. They would run game on Fools. They were absolutely slamming in the backlines. He was actually very intelligent towards the later end of it, but people tend to think of Fraggy as like that suicidal Winston that just leaps in to make space for the rest of his team. That's more how he was playing in Stage 1 and probably the majority of Stage 2, and that has been his tendency in the past as well. Now, I'm not saying that Cloudy is that aggressive, but I am saying that if Cloudy ends up reaching his potential, he could play like Fraggy was playing in Stage 3, you know, like that smart level of Winston, where it's not, you're not dominating, but you're making the right decisions at the right time, and you're really helping your team, and you're able to work with everybody else. But I don't think he's going to be like the playmaking god-tier Winston that just destroys everybody. And as I said, his Ryan seems to be better at the moment, so maybe, again, further parallels to Fraggy. And then we move on to the off-tank. Now, I find the off-tank situation for this team very interesting on the Paris Eternal, and I'm not sure what their solution is going to be for it. Let me outline the problem. They have Finzi as their off-tank, who I didn't think, personally, was one of the best off-tanks in Europe when he was playing contenders over there, but he got picked up for the LA Valiant, which I think was partly because of his, what do you call it, like, great team mentality. Like, he works well within a team, contributes well, calls a lot. So I think that was one of the reasons that the LA Valiant picked him up. They thought he was a developmental player that they'd really be able to give some scrim time to on the sister team and make into a better player. But we didn't see him fielded even once. Some of that was due to visa logistics, apparently. Same with Iziaki on the LA Valiant. But I'm pretty sure that some of it is just because he's not that good on Diva. Like, he's not as good on Diva to be able to take time away from space, certainly. And I don't think even that he's one of the... Unless he's done a lot of developing in the LA Valiant, where he hasn't been getting much scrim time even, because he's had these visa issues, and because they gave up on the sister team idea some way through the season. Like, when has this guy been developing? When has he been playing matches? When has he been getting better? So I don't think you can assume that you can't just extrapolate and imagine that the guy got a lot better than what we've seen from him in contenders in the past. And that means that he's going to be serviceable, but not excellent. So, like, he's going to be okay, but he's not going to be great. And I don't think he's even going to be average, because the average in Overwatch League is so high. And that's one of the problems with Paris Eternal, is that they've got some good players. It's not like they have problem players on any of these roles, honestly, but the average in Overwatch League is just higher than the average on their team, in my opinion. They've picked up a lot of, like, good contenders players, and that doesn't exactly equate to could be good Overwatch League players. Now, the other option that they have is to run Nico on that position. I think Nico is actually a better diva. Nico's been playing diva within, he was playing for Eagle Gaming, which, as I've mentioned before, was one of the best GOATS teams at that time. He knew how to play it. He was a little aggressive, actually, in how he played the diva on that team, but I think that was probably something that their coach wanted as well. I don't know, it's hard to tell. So they could run Nico on the diva role, but that probably takes, and this is going to be a hot take, that probably takes their best flex DPS out of the DPS lineup. And yes, that means that I think Nico is a better flex DPS than Shadowburn and Danier, if you want to call Danier flex DPS. So I think Paris are more likely, when things settle down and you actually see, like, if you see a meta where it's the classic 2-2-2 stuff that we saw throughout Overwatch League 2018, I would expect them to run Nico and Soon on DPS. I would expect that to be their DPS duo. And that means you have to run Finzi. But if you're running something like the GOATS composition, maybe you do want Nico playing the diva. The guy's played diva really well. He's got a lot of experience in really strong GOATS composition teams. He knows, or Fifi, the player development coach, knows how Nico plays and wanted Nico to play like that, presumably, because that's how he played in Eagle. And if the rumors about scrims that we're hearing currently are true, where some teams are going from GOATS over to compositions with a lot of DPS players, and we've also seen this in some of the trials and stuff like that as scrim stuff trickles down into the lower tiers, if you have to switch your off-tank over to a DPS at some point during the game, do you want Nico, who can play a ton of DPS heroes to a really high level, or do you want Finzi, who can play the Soldier 76, admittedly, to a pretty high level, but not much else? So here you see the bit of a pickle that Paris may be in terms of who they want on their off-tank. Now, I'm sure their coaches have discussed this and have come up with what they consider to be the best solution. I don't think this is something that they'll still be grappling with. I don't think this is something that'll throw them for a loop in the middle of the season. They'll have a plan for it. But the fact that you need a plan for how you're rotating the off-tank position suggests that, to me, maybe they should have gone with just a stronger, dedicated off-tank like most of these other teams do. And it could be a potential weakness for the team. So let's go into the DPS. They've got Nico, who I've already talked about. I think he's a really good player. I think he's very flexible. I like the fact that he can play Diva as well as all of these other heroes that he plays. He plays a good Genji. I think it's Owl level, definitely. I think it's better than Shadowburn's as well, which I'll get onto now. I think Shadowburn has kind of... It's not that Shadowburn's gotten worse, it's that the rest of the Overwatch scene has gotten better, and Shadowburn stayed fairly consistent. And this happens with a lot of the guys that used to be really good in 2016 or early 2017, is that the tide rises, and unfortunately some of them drown. We've seen it with Miro. I'm anticipating we might see it with Jaehong this season. I think we will see it with Shadowburn. And I think we did. He was subbed out of Philadelphia Fusion for EQO. His playstyle is quite passive. He likes to go for these big dragon blades rather than using them a little more intelligently, I would say, with either creating space for other people or going for guaranteed singular picks. He likes to wait until all of the support ultimates have been traded and then go for like big multi-kills. But Dragon Blade doesn't have to be a big multi-kill tool. And just in general, the more passive way that he plays, I think, isn't, or certainly wasn't, meta in 2018, and I think isn't the best way of playing Genji. You want to be able to trust your team to peel for you and play a little bit more in their face, make them a bit more scared of you, force them to take a more passive position when you're on Genji. His Pharah is still really good, in my opinion. I think there are other people with great Pharahs that are coming into the league, Who are some names? Hydration has a fantastic Farah. Fleta has a fantastic Farah. I think Ding, who's coming in on the Shanghai Dragons, has a fantastic Farah. But I think Shadowburn's up there with them. Unless we see a full Farah meta, though, I think you would be better off running Nico and Soon. Soon is just the staple, consistent hit scan. In my opinion, if you're looking across the whole of history, he's the best Western player. Yeah, I don't know whether any of you saw that article recently about Shofor. I think Shofor's got a good shout for it. For my money, it would be Soon. The guy's been, winning and putting up great results and consistent results and dependable results since 2016, and you always know what you're going to get out of him, and that's fantastic to pair alongside some of these other guys. Now, what it doesn't give you is star power, and if the rest of his team isn't pulling their weight, if they have troubles with their tank line and they're getting beaten by other tank lines in the league, then Soon I don't think is going to be the guy that just takes control of the game. But certainly if the rest of his roster can rise to a mid-level, Soon's certainly going to be able to keep up with everybody else and keep giving you consistent results over and over again. The other guy that they've got on the team is Danye, who I don't know as much about. They kind of pulled him from some middling teams in European contenders, and you might know him from Team Poland as well. Played a lot of Zarya there, also plays a bunch of other heroes flexing around, but I don't know what we're going to see him play within Paris Eternal. I can't see a specific slot for him either, because I think Finzi probably has a better Zarya than Danye does, although it's been a long time since I've seen Finzi's Zarya, so maybe that's not the case. Perhaps if there is like a dedicated full-time Zarya position within the team, like for example in a GOATS comp, then and that would have to be in a GOATS composition where you have no intention of switching, then maybe Danye would be the best choice. We'll have to see. It looks like more of a developmental bench player to me. So in total, it looks like the team has a lot of potential, but they've kind of fit in a bunch of good to very good contenders players. I think if I was going to create a European super team, which is what some people think this is, or some people want this to be. I had quite a few EU people when I released my power rankings saying this team should be higher, why are you underrating Europe, etc. I don't think I'm underrating Europe. If I was going to create a European super team, I think I'd go with Cruz. I think I would have tried to pick up a different main tank that wasn't playing in Europe at the moment, but maybe I would have gone with Cloudy. But I think that's a weaker position overall. And maybe I would have tried to pick up Soon and slot him alongside somebody else who was really sick. And maybe I would have gone for Nico, but on the off-tank position, and tried to have like a really good DPS alongside him. And even then, a super team from Europe would only, in my opinion, be like a playoff contender, like somewhere around middle of the table. I don't think they'd be world beaters. So I don't see that this roster is really there on paper. But they are very flexible, and they have a ton of potential, and they have a great coaching staff. So we'll see what the coaching staff can get done with this team. And I think all the credit to them if they're able to really develop this team. I think they're going to be slow burners over the course of the season. I don't think you should expect them to come smashing out of the gates and destroying everybody, but I think you could expect them to get slowly better over the course of the season and develop into a really good team and adapt to patches very well. I think this is a meta-resistant team. Every player on the team is flexible. I mean, they got Nico, who can cover all sorts of different things. Soon is actually a pretty flexible player, even though people think of him as like a Tracer one-trick. Certainly isn't. Shadowburn, even in himself, is relatively flexible, even though I don't think he's the flex god that most people would label him as. And then Cruz as well, very flexible player, can cover a lot of stuff. So between the team, the individual pieces they have are very flexible, and I think the fact that they have an intelligent coaching staff and a flexible team will allow them to cover whatever meta is thrown at them to a reasonable level. I think they'll be fast to adapt. But the ceiling that this team can hit is the thing that worries me. What is their schedule? I have no idea, so I'm just going to look it up right now. Bear with me, because that could be really interesting for Paris, because I'm expecting, as I said, them to slowly develop throughout the season. So they have... Okay, so they start off with the London Spitfire, and then they have the LA Gladiators in week 2, the Atlanta Reign in week 3, Vancouver Titans, and San Francisco Shock in week 4. So these are some pretty difficult games. I think the London Spitfire, they shouldn't be expected to win, especially considering that I think they're going to be slow burners. I think the LA Gladiators as well, that's going to be a really difficult match. The Atlanta Reign is more where they can start getting themselves rolling. Week 3, and they're playing against the Reign. They should have similar levels of team coordination, and I think that should be a really good game, because Atlanta Reign have got higher individual skill, but might have lower levels of teamwork and adaptability and coaching, perhaps. So that'll be an interesting clash. The two teams have kind of been built in opposite styles. And then they have the Vancouver Titans and San Francisco Shock, which I think neither of those teams they should be expected to beat. But we'll see anyway. So I think if you're a fan of the team from Paris, or you're a European, there's a lot to be happy here about. Firstly, the fact that there are so many Europeans on this team and they're seeing playtime. And there's optimism and hope for the future of what the coaches can do. But I think you would be shooting yourself in the foot and getting a little bit of false hope, perhaps, if you think that this is a European super team that's about to come out and stomp everybody. And that is why I've been forced to put them towards the lower end of my power rankings, even though I do admit that a lot of people disagree.